President Trump addresses the UN.
Now we are calling for a great reawakening of nations.
We're in New York City with highlights from his speech, plus reaction. Christian persecution. The Senate committee considers emergency aid for victims of genocide. We'll talk to the bill's sponsor. Hurricane Maria. The storm smashes into Dominica and heads toward Puerto Rico. And the Fulton Sheen Center will show you what the Archdiocese of New York is doing to showcase art with a Catholic focus. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, September 19th, 2017.
Major portions of the world are in conflict, and some, in fact, are going to hell.
President Trump slams America's enemies during his first speech at the United Nations and calls for all countries to work together to fight terrorism. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We have team coverage of the president's speech and how it shapes U.S. foreign policy. Correspondent Mark Irons will bring us reaction to the president's war of words against rogue nations. But first, Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the United Nations in New York City. Good evening, Wyatt.
Lauren, good evening from a very rainy New York City. President Donald Trump delivering a very combative speech here at the UN, addressing nations like Syria and Iran, calling them the scourge on the earth. But his most blatant threat was directed at North Korea when he used language rarely used for a U.S. president in this diplomatic call.
Rocket Man is on a suicide mission for himself and for his regime.
President Trump denounces North Korea and its leader, Kim Jong-un, during his first speech to the United Nations. And the president warns America will strike back if attacked.
We will have no choice but to totally destroy North Korea.
President Trump, during his roughly 40-minute speech, urged nations to join together to stop rogue regimes like Iran.
It is far past time for the nations of the world to confront another reckless regime.
Syria.
The actions of the criminal regime shock the conscience of every decent person.
And Venezuela.
The socialist dictatorship of Nicolas Maduro has inflicted terrible pain and suffering.
Despite the harsh rhetoric, President Trump promised the United States will forever be a great friend to the world and its allies. Trump challenging the UN.
The United Nations can be a much more accountable and effective advocate for human dignity and freedom,
by offering to send aid to refugees,
which enables their eventual return to their home countries,
and promising to fight together for peace and justice.
And for the Almighty God who made us all.
President Trump still worries about the threat of what he calls radical Islamic terrorism. He also says it brings tears to the earth, and it says it's time that's why we come together to, quote, crush the loser terrorists. Lauren?
Is the president still threatening to withdraw U.S. support from the UN?
No, he's not, Lauren. At this point, President Trump has changed his tone on that. He's been holding several different meetings here at the UN, has complimented them for the reform work that they were doing. He's also very supportive of the new UN Secretary General, Antonio Guterres. Lauren?
You have mentioned before is Catholic. Thank you so much. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee at the UN. Praise for the president's speech. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says in his 30 years of experience with the UN, he has never heard a more bolder or courageous speech. For more reaction, correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Lauren. Not everyone was as enthusiastic as Netanyahu. Democratic Senator Dianne Feinstein says one goal of the UN is to foster peace, but she says the president used it as a stage to threaten war. I spoke with an expert on international affairs who says the president was just being himself.
It was a very strong speech.
Brett Schaefer is an expert on international affairs at the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank in Washington. He says the tone of President Trump's speech reflects his character.
He's very confrontational. He's willing to mix it up, and this was certainly pulling no punches before the assembled leaders of the world in the UN.
In his view, President Trump's choice of words on North Korea leaves little room for misinterpretation.
It is time for all nations to work together to isolate the Kim regime.
It is a direct glove thrown to the floor of the other member states in the UN General Assembly, saying that this needs to be handled and handled quickly, or you know what the potential consequences of that are, and we're all trying to avoid those.
And the challenge Trump issued to fellow world leaders was equally clear.
If the righteous many do not confront the wicked few, then evil will triumph.
I think that China and Russia have the opportunity to put real pressure on North Korea to signal to that government that this is not only a course that is not going to be in their interest, but also threatens the interests of China and Russia as far as destabilizing their border, their region.
The president also blasted Iran's government in his speech, calling it a murderous regime whose chief exports are violence, bloodshed, and chaos. Iran's foreign minister is reportedly responding, calling the president's remarks mean and pointless. Lauren?
There were many other people who really criticized the president for his whole Make America Great approach to this. Now, the president said that the U.S. is a compassionate nation, and he cited billions of dollars in aid given to Syrian refugees. Have you heard reaction to those remarks?
We reached out to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. Their executive director of Migration and Refugee Services says the bishops support the part of the president's speech that addressed refugees' basic needs, such as providing for nutrition and health care. But the USCCB believes there is still much work to be done on behalf of refugees around the world.
Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thank you, Mark. To get congressional reaction from the United Nations in New York City is Representative Chris Smith of New Jersey. He's also a representative of the U.S. to the United Nations General Assembly. Welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Lauren. Thanks for having me on.
Tell me what your reaction is to the president's speech, specifically his statement about North Korea.
Well, I think it was a very strong speech. He pointed out that there are existential threats being posed by both North Korea and Iran. As he pointed out, the Iran nuclear deal is egregiously flawed, and it makes it inevitable, frankly, that it's a matter of when and not if that Iran will get nuclear weapons. And certainly their ballistic missile testing, like in North Korea, threatens, in the case of North Korea, South Korea, Japan, the whole region, and even the United States as Kim builds out his mileage for those ICBMs that he's developing. So increasingly the threat is on overdrive, and I think we need to see the Chinese, as he pointed out, and the Russians do even more, especially the Chinese. He thanked the Chinese and Russians, but they have to do far more than what they've done. Xi Jinping has to step up to the plate to try to end this crisis.
What other issues are you addressing on behalf of the U.S.?
Well, I'm doing a seminar on the president's emergency plan for AIDS relief. We just are in the process of appropriating another $6 billion to try to end the pandemic of HIV/AIDS, malaria around the world, and of course the emerging threat of TB. It is now the leading infectious disease killer in the world.
TB,
no one has done more than the United States for that. Yes, tuberculosis, TB.
Yeah.
And no other infectious disease kills more than TB.
Finally, I want to ask you about something very near and dear to your heart that's happened here in Washington today. The Senate Foreign Relations Committee finally took up your bill, H.R. 390, providing assistance to Christians in Iraq and Syria. What is your reaction to that?
Relieved, overjoyed. It's still not out of the Senate, but I expect it will be now. I introduced that bill September 9th. Last year. It took a while to get it through the House, but we got it through. As you know from your trip to Erbil and your meeting with the Christians, they were left out by the previous administration. I was shocked. I had 9 congressional hearings dedicated to trying to say, President Obama, please get funding to the Christians and the Yazidis who are suffering horrifically, as IDPs, internally displaced persons. If it wasn't for the Knights of Columbus and some of the others who came up with tens of millions of dollars, we would have had more deaths, lack of shelter, and of course medicines. It's about time, with all the billions we have poured into humanitarian relief for the refugees, not to exclude the Christians and the Yazidis. This bill will ensure that they get that funding and that help.
Thank you so much, Representative Chris Smith
thank you.
of New Jersey.
Thank you, Lauren.
As we just heard Representative Smith say, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee unanimously gave the green light to his bill to help persecuted Christians and other victims in Iraq and Syria. We go now to Capitol Hill correspondent Jason Calvi for more. Jason, good evening.
Good evening, Lauren. ISIS destroyed, as you know from visiting, many of Iraq's Christian towns and villages. According to the Archdiocese of Erbil in northern Iraq, more than 1 million Christians lived in the country in 2002. Now they estimate that number is between 100 or 200,000. This bill today will help those Christians as well as victims of Syria's civil war. And today, senators are finally moving this bill forward.
Accountability for war crimes is critically important. We all will say never again. And the only way never again will be realized is if we make sure that those who commit atrocities are held fully accountable. And the United States must be in the leadership.
The bill passed out of committee today. It explicitly says U.S. aid can go to religious groups like the Archdiocese of Erbil who help victims of the Christian genocide. According to a USAID fact sheet, the U.S. government pumped $1.1 billion into the humanitarian crisis in Iraq from 2014 to 2016. But supporters of the bill say that money hasn't been getting to Christians, and they say time is running out.
If we don't change the way that we are dispensing aid in this part of the region, the evisceration of the Christian community in that part of the world will have happened on our watch.
The Southern Baptist Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission backs the bill, as do the Knights of Columbus, the U.S. Bishops' Conference, and many other groups. The bill now heads to the full Senate for a vote. And Lauren, since the Senate made some tweaks today, the House will need to approve the changes to the bill.
What are the chances that this bill will pass?
Well, it's got a really good record right now. The House already unanimously approved it back in June. That was 3 months ago. The Senate committee did the same today. So supporters are hopeful it could get full support in the Senate.
And I was hearing from the representative, it could be as early as next week. We shall see. Correspondent Jason Calvi at the Capitol, thank you so much. Top Senate Republicans say their last-ditch push to overhaul President Obama's health care law is gaining momentum.
Well, number one, I've never felt better. So here's the choice for America: socialism or federalism when it comes to your health care.
Republican Lindsey Graham and other senators talked to the media this afternoon. They have less than 2 weeks to succeed before a certain Democratic filibuster. 3 attempts for passage of similar measures fell short and delivered an embarrassing defeat to President Trump and Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. A strong earthquake shakes central Mexico late this afternoon. At least 2 people have died. Buildings have been damaged. The epicenter of the 7.1 magnitude quake was 76 miles southeast of Mexico City in the city of Roboso. Category 5 Hurricane Maria barrels toward Puerto Rico after wreaking havoc on Guadalupe and Dominica. The Category 5 storm, with 160-mile-per-hour winds, smashed into Dominica. At least 1 person has died in the nearby island of Guadalupe. Maria's path is similar to the one taken by Irma, devastating the Caribbean region. It's on track to hit Puerto Rico tomorrow. A Filipino official is dismissing an entire city police force outside of Manila. It comes after some of its members were suspected in the gruesome killing of 3 teenagers and were caught by closed-circuit television robbing a house. Police say the 1,200-strong Caloocan City Police Force will be relieved in batches and replaced. Syrian President Bashar al-Assad says Christians in Syria are part of its origin and are not guests. He made the comments during a gathering organized by the Syriac Orthodox Church. Assad has repeatedly shown his closeness to that church, those church leaders. He's accused of violating human rights, including gassing his own people. His government is waging a 6-year civil war. The U.S.-led international coalition supports non-government forces in the conflict. Coming up, Star Parker joins me to talk about the president's potential decision to protect young immigrants. and socking it to Planned Parenthood, the national kickoff for a pro-life campaign. The Senate confirms Noel Francisco to be Solicitor General of the United States in a 50-47 vote. He'll have the task of arguing the administration's cases at the Supreme Court. He's a former Justice Scalia clerk who fought the HHS mandate against the Obama administration. Rhode Island Governor Gina Raimondo announces the state will pay for renewal fees for local immigrants in the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals program known as DACA. Joining us now, Star Parker, president of CURE, which stands for the Center for Urban Renewal and Education. Welcome back to the program.
Well, thank you. It's good to be back with you.
Always great to have you. What's your reaction to this news coming out of Rhode Island?
Well, I wish that they would take a pause, the different governors and others that are trying to weigh in their opinion before the Congress acts and then the president makes a decision what he's going to do about DACA. This is a very serious issue. People have stolen into our country in massive numbers now. The American people are saying we want our borders secure and we want to do something on comprehensive immigration reform, and the Congress must act, the president must act.
So what we're seeing is individual states, especially in the case of sanctuary cities, and now what we're seeing with Rhode Island, making their own decisions. You say, I found this very interesting, that Christians, we should extend mercy to those in the DACA program, but also remind them that our country is a nation of laws and that they received mercy. Explain what you're saying there.
Well, this is why I don't believe that even the sanctuary city debates, that all of the local municipalities should get involved. This is very, very complicated. When you think about justice, there are two sides to the scale of justice. There's judgment, and they should be judged. Their parents broke the law, but there's mercy. And what has happened now, we have youth in our country who've grown up here. They have never been in Mexico. And we have to now consider this, and we have to consider it very strongly as Christians and as Catholics to say, do we round up people and just kick them out of the country? But that said, when someone extends mercy, you should be grateful. This is an act of charity to say, I'm going to extend mercy to you. You're getting something that you really don't deserve. What you deserve is the penalties that would come with what your parents have done, which was broke the law. And in that, we've seen a displacement of actual gratitude to where we have this entitlement mentality that's running through our country demanding that they stay and then extend benefit. And that's where we're having this complication in the States.
A lot of mixed messages going back and forth. Do you have a solution in mind, or is it all work together? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you can't really work together when one side is saying, no, we're not doing absolutely anything. You have to just let these people stay free. I actually think that there are things that we can do. I mean, if we're going to have the children of immigrants who stole into our country stay here and become Americans, then they should learn the English language. They should be respectful for our laws, so they should know the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, and maybe even they should serve in the military, because what they're doing right now to insist that we get to stay regardless, we get to take advantage of all programs, even though there is a lot of activity in our most hard-hit communities of competition, it's just not going to work for the country. So I'm looking forward to the president making a firm stand on what he thinks about this, as well as then the Congress acting to get some comprehensive immigration reform.
Thank you so much, Star Parker, president of CURE, the Center for Urban Renewal and Education.
Thank you.
Students for Life of America launches a national campus tour to sock it to Planned Parenthood.
We're taking these socks on the road to cities and towns across America to help people raise their voice together to our elected officials to say, defund Planned Parenthood.
The kickoff event took place today in Washington, D.C. They will travel around the country with 328,348 socks. That represents each of the lives taken by Planned Parenthood last year. Students for Life has representation on nearly 1,200 high school and college campuses. Up next, inside the Fulton Sheen Center and its mission for the Archdiocese of New York. Plus, the Catholic book Hillary Clinton reads again and again. Today we remember St. Januarius on his feast day. His blood is kept in Naples as a relic and liquefies and bubbles when exposed in the cathedral. Scientists have not been able to explain this miracle. The Holy Father is setting up a new institution to study marriage and the family. Its aim is to promote the teaching of Amoris Laetitia, or the Joy of Love document written by Pope Francis. It will explore complex realities of family life in light of church teaching. Juliet Lindley is EWTN News Nightly's Vatican correspondent. She joins us from Rome. First of all, what is this new organization Pope Francis is creating?
Well, it was founded more than 20 years ago and is devoted to the study of all aspects of the nucleus of human society, which would be marriage and family. Now, the novelty today is that whereas previously it was within the Pontifical Lateran University and it could only issue diplomas, it now becomes a theological institute that has all the credentials of a university and is able to impart degrees, whether postgrad or undergrad degrees.
In marriage and family. That's interesting. Can you give us a sense of why this change is significant?
Well, essentially what we are seeing is Pope Francis fortifying an institution that had been created by his predecessor to bring it in step with the changing face of society. It now becomes a theological one as well as a high-level scientific one dedicated to all aspects of the family, including anthropological, historical and social angles. Now, it remains to be seen what the statutes, what the guidelines will be, but certainly a boost is being given to the authority of this school.
Juliet Lindley, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lauren.
Bishop Fulton Sheen captivated television audiences in the 1950s and 60s. His Emmy Award-winning gift of communicating Catholic theology through popular culture lives on. The New York City Sheen Center for Thought and Culture is now in its second season. Broadway inspirational voices took to the stage at the Fulton Sheen Center. It's one of a dozen musical groups, dancers, speakers, and actors like John Lithgow who have performed at the Arts Center. It's founded and supported by the New York City Archdiocese.
Let's go see. Yeah, let's go see.
The building, a former Catholic school.
This is the last vestige of when this was a church and a school of Our Lady of Loretto.
Shares a wall with Planned Parenthood.
The other side of that wall is Planned Parenthood. So we are situated in a place where a lot of people don't believe in God.
The goal is to showcase arts content with a Catholic focus.
Well, the mission is actually to foster and to explore the true, the good, and the beautiful.
Executive Director Bill Riley says it's an opportunity to draw in those who may not be practicing or don't understand the tenets of the Catholic Church.
And my job, I believe, more than anything, is to just surprise people and just to say, come and have a look. It's much harder to get people to say, come to church, but perhaps to come to a film or a play, which then might open up a conversation about the deeper truths of the genius of Catholicism.
And Riley says the best way to evangelize is to tell a great story.
Where is the message here? And then surprise people who are not Catholics, or people who are, about how the power of the arts can really transform your life.
Dave DeSerto is the programming director.
If it's true, if it's good, and it's beautiful, it is by definition a Catholic work of art.
The center's namesake was one of the most popular Catholic communicators in the 50s and 60s. His audience reached beyond core Catholics. His program, Life is Worth Living, still airs on EWTN.
You know, Fulton Sheen was a pioneer of the new evangelization before there was a new evangelization.
And that's exactly what this center in the heart of Lower Manhattan aspires to be.
It's nice to preach to the choir, and we do that as well. But people sitting on the fence or who are vehemently anti-Catholic, it's important to say, come here and let's talk about this. And at the same time, the truth will come out, because the true, the good, and the beautiful, which is what we're about, I think always wins at the end of the day.
It's a wonderful center, and I had the great pleasure and opportunity of touring there and talking to them. Finally tonight, guess what? Hillary Clinton has a book out. You might have heard about that. In the wake of her presidential loss, we are now learning that she went back to her own bookshelf in times of trouble and reread one of her favorites, a book by a Dutch priest. She says this book, The Return of the Prodigal Son by Father Henri Nouwen, is a book she often came to in difficult times in her life. She says she identifies with the older brother in the parable because she is the oldest in her family. For all of us here at EWTN News Nightly, to all of you around the world, thank you for watching. I'm Lauren Ashburn. We'll be back tomorrow with more news from a Catholic perspective. Good night, and God bless you.